Hey guys, Z here. You know what else is here? The latest Brave units, as well as the older outclassed ones, sharing with them on this banner, but that's neither here nor there. It's been less than a year since they were added to the game, which in Faye terms is a very long time given how fast units come and go in terms of usability. Brave units are also no exception to that rule, despite getting better treatment than most units of their respective book. So that begs the question, how many of them are still remotely usable? Let's start with Brave Byleth. Brave Byleth is one of many units nowadays that can naturally reach 6 spaces thanks to his style. It works once every 2 turns, he can hit 3 times thanks to potent, and most important of all, he gives you 2 times SP when grinding. Unironically, the best aging effect here. Of the 4 Brave units, he's the one that currently sees the most use. I know personally speaking, I definitely underestimated him despite having the range that he has. My largest concern at the time was that even with that range, his firepower in bulk was going to take a hit in the process. And to some degree, I don't think it was that unfounded. Without a bit of a kit change, he was relying on Gust for his special damage reduction, which wasn't always the most consistent. If he couldn't safely initiate into something, then having all that range wouldn't have done much in the end. But even if he could safely initiate, he needed the firepower to back it up or something to make it consistent enough. In fact, a lot of teams with Byleth tend to have reflex support because of that. However, despite needing a bit to really get going, he really was one of the only units at the time with that kind of range, which more than made up for it. And that's where I think I was a bit too harsh, because you can patch up combat, but you can't really patch up range. He's still very common in Aether raids even now because of it. Even I have him on my defense team, although I do think part of that is due to him being semi-free, since he's way more accessible than a lot of the other 6 range units we have in the game. We also have a lot of units with that type of range with a lot more firepower, gimmicks, and effects to boot. Some ignore drive support, some have a way better bulk, so on and so forth. The new Celica in particular is just a newer Brave Byleth for the most part without a tether to boot. That part will mostly come up in summoner duels, but in Aether raids it doesn't really matter that much since there's means of keeping him in range. Point being, we have a lot more options to work with these days and will only continue to get more down the line. It's not even necessarily a point against him per se, that's just how Faye is with anything. Although with Byleth in particular, I don't think he's gonna get entirely phased out anytime soon at least. He's still plenty good, and turns out, having 6 range on maps mostly consisting of 6x8 grids is very strong. And to Byleth's credit too, he does have noteworthy support effects, providing penalty neutralization, null follow-up, and allowing units to double up on their special damage reduction is really nice. That said, he definitely needs reflex support and a bit of a kit change to really shine. He isn't as bulky as he can be without something like Arc Rival, and with how stronger newer units are getting, having a consistent way of getting through them is important. He does at least get the damage reduction benefits with Gust, but it also has to go off or be charged beforehand, unlike Arc Rival that just works immediately. The rest of his kit though still honestly holds up even now. Bulwark and his C skill is still a really strong effect, especially for someone like him that wants to be a frontliner. Null Sea Avoid is nice against units that inflict flash or get around his ability to counter, and it has the standard true damage and true damage reduction built into it. You could give him Instruct or Cancer Control for more stats or defensive coverage though, but otherwise I would say that even now he's still pretty good at what he does. I know it may not sound like it considering what you have to do to fix up his combat, but you can make up combat on almost any unit. You can't make up range differences, which is what Byleth still has over many units, even if they have significantly better combat capabilities. It's why somebody like a Tuned Ryoma never really took off as much as he could have. Either way, he may not be the best 6 range unit we have these days, but he does what he needs to do still, which is more than good enough currently. As for the other Brave unit that continues to see use, we have Eikthynir. Brave Eikthynir's whole shtick is that he provides magic save to a unit while doubling up as a savior himself on top of providing some stat boosts. I think a majority of people were in agreement that a save unit like him was going to be the one that falls off the quickest, since the arms race between damage dealers and tanks continue to escalate. It's just the nature of those types of things in general, since newer additions have to account for the latest and greatest stuff. However, he's been surprisingly resilient despite being a save tank. A lot of this isn't even necessarily due to him being extremely bulky though. In fact, he's had a bunch of issues tanking stuff even late last year, primarily with reflex units and Baby Camilla, cause that's the unit ever. If he couldn't beat the former in retaliation, he'd just get blown up by reflect damage. But besides that, a lot of what made Eikthynir team so good were the supports in tandem with his roll compression. One of the most common team combinations for a while consisted of him and Dual Marth, cause those two alone could provide plus 30 to every single stat. It's still around, but not nearly to the same degree that it was late last year, as there's more to account for nowadays. He recently saw a boost to his survivability because of Emblem Lucina, who makes a lot of units bulkier in general. However, for save teams, it's especially nice since the crux of their team relies on their ability to survive things in general. It also helps that there's been less reflex as of late in summoner duels, which means there's one less thing he has to account for. The addition of Mythic Tiki also benefits him greatly, as units like Summer Thor can't remove everything off that team. There's been a lot of notable buffs that make him significantly more usable than he otherwise would be at this point in time. However, one thing that's always going to work against him is that his archetype heavily relies on his ability to tank, which isn't always going to be the case. It's a take on what Brave Soren introduced at the time, except the role compression makes it so you could bring more units for additional support or combat, but that means there's going to be a time limit on how long this niche can last, unlike Soren, who could theoretically work indefinitely at the cost of one less unit to work with. Still, the role compression is so good that it's why Eikthynir is prioritized much more often over Soren, and in theory, there could be enough support units introduced over the course of this year that keep him around longer than he has any right to be. It's hard to say given how the game is though. Units are going to get stronger, we're going to get better saves, and depending on what other mechanics they introduce, there may not even be a need for him at all by that point. There's genuinely no telling what the game is going to look like in a few months, or even a week. But yeah, Eikthynir really is one of those units that should have aged out by this point, but is still seeing use to this day. He is primarily a summoner duels unit though, but hey, I'll gladly take more units that last longer on average. I think the game needs more units like that currently. On the flip side, we have the other two Brave units that really fell out of favor faster than expected. In Brave Sharena's case, I don't even think it's a matter of being a bad unit. Even now, I would consider her a decent unit in what she contributes to Aetherite's offense. She's a ranged cav with Miracle that can provide Gale Force to any ally within 3 spaces and get an additional action herself. She's not your main damage dealer and isn't there to take out the main tanks, but rather act up as a cleanup unit, which is where all of the extra actions are incredibly helpful. Between her and one other unit, at minimum, you're getting 4 actions, which is pretty nice. You'd think a unit like her would be used more often for Gale Force clearing, but here's the funny thing with that. They dropped a strictly better version of her only 2 months after the Brave. Funny how that works. Although maybe that's not the right term, because getting power crept that quickly is pretty ridiculous. I wouldn't even say it's a side grade where you could debatably rank them on equal measure. Entwined Sharena is just a strict upgrade overall. She more or less plays the exact same, but has a couple notable distinctions. The first and arguably the most apparent distinction is that the Gale Force she gives out to an ally doesn't have a 3-space tether anymore. It can be used map-wide if they're ally supported, which is a huge jump since it requires less setup to get going. The other distinction that Entwined has over Brave is that she could get even more actions due to being a Lance Cav. She can't run Edelgard's Emblem Ring because it would cancel out her effects, but she could still run Gale Force Mist, so not only is she more flexible as a Gale Force support unit, but she could get more actions on top of it all. Combine that with stuff like Erika's Emblem Ring effect or Micaiah for positioning and cleansing without being gravitied, and you simply have a stronger version of Brave Sharena. Besides that, their main differences come down to Entwined's lack of Miracle and the different start of turn bonuses they give out. Brave gives out Creation Pulse and Empathy, while Entwined gives out Resonance Blade, Null Follow-Up, and Incited, but the differences aren't that substantial. They're all useful in their own right. The Miracle effect is a nice enough distinction though, since it makes her a safer initiator by default, but Entwined can make up for it with sheer bulk and skills that provide more damage reduction. Regardless, neither are going to be your main initiator. They're both complementary units, and between the two of them, Entwined Sharena just does way more than Brave Sharena, but despite being outclassed, I think Brave Sharena kinda falls into a similar camp of Brave Byleth where they could still be useful. Although Byleth just has a lot more going on for him, so it's not a one-for-one comparison. I think you get what I mean with it though. It's not as if you couldn't use Brave Sharena anymore for Gale Force teams because there's a better version of her. She still provides a bunch of extra actions, which is good for clearing up defense teams. It's just one of those unfortunate things where there's really no reason to use her if you have Entwined. I know some people use both together, but I feel like that's a bit much. I feel like you're better off bringing another unit that can make Gale Forcing a lot easier, but if nothing else, she's not unusable, which I think is the best thing in the end. She can at least do something, which is the last thing I could say about Brave Baldr. She's one of those units that I think many people, including myself, expected to do a lot more in practice. Her whole thing was that she could swap between color types, she had brave hits, she inflicted triangle adept, and she got a bunch of damage reduction based on weapon triangle shenanigans. This, alongside Arc Rival, was really great for all sorts of matchups against anything red and blue, especially when Legendary Black Knight was at his peak. Having someone that could directly counter him was really nice. But that's all she really did, and that was her biggest issue, honestly. At this point in the game, every unit has to do everything. New releases have to be good in combat, and they have to have some semblance of support, or that support has to be so good that it doesn't matter if they have combat to begin with, but that usually means they break the game in half. Images unrelated. In Baldr's case, all she really had was combat, which meant she was going to age out really quickly. She had some debuffs in Triangle Adept and Exposure, but they were mostly there to benefit her. And Exposure is good, but it wasn't good enough with her specifically. She really was just a decent player phase unit for a time with nothing else to offer, so she was going to age out once we got something stronger. That or when she became inconsistent, which also happened a lot quicker than I thought it would. Even against units like Black Knight, there would be times where she wouldn't even win. Part of that was due to people dropping distant counter on their saves just so they could avoid getting reflexed, which we already saw signs of before she showed up. Regardless, she at least had some time to work as a unit. She could pop some units on Eikthynir's offense and was pretty decent as a defense unit given her style shift. That said, I couldn't even imagine trying to make her work these days given everything that's in the game. She has extra movement innately, which is a problem as stall is incredibly common. She can't use the Lin Ring either due to her style. I think if she were able to use it, it would have helped a fair bit. But units have gotten way stronger and bulkier, so it's hard to say if that's even her largest issue at this point. To be honest, the aspect about Baldr that aged the best was her fodder. Arc Rival's still one of the best specials to pass around at the moment because it has unconditional damage reduction, innate guard, and potential special manipulation. The main thing is the damage reduction though, as it's mandatory for surviving a lot more combats than units otherwise could. It's been printed so much ever since Baldr's release, even getting a second release that same month, and despite it being more common as an inheritable, it really hasn't gone down in value yet. Deadly Miasma, on the other hand, has only continued to age well because of the addition of Emblem Corrin in her terrain. Being able to override it with Miasma is fantastic for getting around defensive cores, and it provides some extra stat swings on top of it. This skill is over 2 years old at this point, but it only continues to go up in value as we get more gimmicks and effects like Vert and Ice. And Speed Taker. Okay, Speed Taker isn't that noteworthy these days. It's an okay enough skill, but there's a lot more to choose from at this point. It used to be really good though, if that means anything. But besides that, she still has 2 really strong inheritable skills that many units want. I know it doesn't really help Baldr's case as a unit, but at least ending up with a copy wouldn't be the worst thing currently. However, between the 4 Brave units from this batch, she's easily the worst one at this point. There's really nowhere to use her besides PvE stuff, which is unfortunate because she's a really cool unit. You could maybe try and salvage her combat capabilities with reflex, but she doesn't even have the range that Byleth has comparatively. And so many units nowadays can reach even further that it's going to take more effort than it's really worth. To me, the range power creep is genuinely the worst aspect about it all, and that could be an entire video of its own, to be honest. But on the bright side, there's her New Year's version who does everything Brave does, but way better. Range, combat, survivability, making me very upset, all the works. And man, is she really good at that last one. But yeah, that sure is the Choose Your Legends 9 batch. I'm gonna be honest, it could have been a lot worse for most of them, considering most of the Choose Your Legends 8 Brave batch couldn't even last past 3 months. It's surprising that more than half of the latest batch is still good or even usable. Brave Byleth still has this whole 3-space style thing going on, and we do have better units at this point to make use of, but he still functions, which is really nice. That said, out of the box, Byleth isn't that good. He really wants Arc Rival and allies that can provide reflex support to get going, but besides that, he's still hanging on for the most part, which I think is pretty cool. Brave Eikthynir is honestly weird because he's the one I figured would age out the fastest given his niche is acting as a savior support that doubles up as a savior himself. The role compression is still incredibly valuable, and while newer units have gotten way stronger, the addition of Emblem Lucina is going to keep him around for a while longer than I think most people anticipated. Granted, this is mostly for Summoner Duel stuff because that's where his niche is the most valued, but at least he has something going on for him. It'll be really interesting to see how long he'll last though, because we could end up getting more support that extends his lifespan even more. That said, when he becomes too unreliable as a tank, I think that's when people are going to stop using him entirely. Brave Sharena, meanwhile, was the unit I think most people figured would last the longest, but really had so little time. The worst part is that it's not even her fault. Providing allies Gale Force and having a bunch of actions herself is fantastic for Gale Force teams. It's just unfortunate that they dropped a strict upgrade to her only 2 months after, who could provide her support map-wide instead of within 3 spaces, which is a huge jump in quality. Combined with her own ability to run Gale Force and access to more notable emblem ring effects, you just have a better unit to work with overall. But for what it's worth, if you were to use Brave Sharena even now, she could still function well. She's definitely usable, but it's more of a question of why would you use her over Entwined, assuming you had a copy. And Brave Baldr, well, at least the other 3 are functional. Still, it's a massive step up from previous batches, which is great because I think units have been aging out way too fast as of late. All of them will eventually fall off sooner or later because that's the nature of the game, but the fact that most of them could still be used to some success even now is a really great thing. Anyway, are you using any of them still? Are you using the characters people voted for to get in alt because they're very popular? Are you using the characters most people watching this video really like? Let me know down below. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, and until next time, I'll see you when Brave Eikthynir gets another buff.
Let's rumble.